So we're going to talk about being triggered and what that means, because there kind of are two different meanings for triggered, and both could be relevant. But either way, we need to know how to deal with both. So being triggered is a word that's come from predominantly post-traumatic stress psychology. And a trigger would be something like, let's say you'd been in a war or a war zone, and you know, a lot of sound of gunshot, maybe you'd had a gunshot wound. Then years later, you might, you survived, but years later you hear a car backfiring, and the car backfiring triggers the memory and the experience of being shot, and you're put back into that trauma place. That's technically what a proper trigger is. But that feeling of trauma, and I want to make the distinction between post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder and having experienced traumas and negative experiences throughout our life, which have conditioned and shaped us. So the reason why I believe that the word trigger has become so widely used in therapy, emotional coaching, general self-development work, is because what we're now identifying way more than in previous generations is that we have experiences in our past that form us, shape us, often they are negative experiences or challenging, uncomfortable experiences that form us and shape us. And sometimes what can happen is we have a stimulus, and we'll talk to you about that more in a moment, which will put us back in the place of the discomfort or that negativity or the horrendous experience. So let me just give you some different examples of that. A trigger could be someone says something to us, just says anything to us, and suddenly we feel uncomfortable. So that discomfort could be, I feel defensive, so therefore I feel attacked, I feel not good enough. It sort of literally triggers one of our core wounds of I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, you're going to leave me, I'm going to be abandoned. Any of those kind of feelings, usually at this level in conversation, it'll be I'm not good enough, something I've done is wrong, I'm wrong, something's happened, I need to placate this person. All of this stuff, which can be from our childhood, maybe from some bullying, if you had over-controlling parents, if you had a sibling that used to pick on you, if you struggled in a job or anything at all, we can just be put back in there. So that could even be not necessarily someone saying something to you, but being in an experience. So I know a trigger for me was just someone saying that I needed to do something in a certain way, which someone could actually be saying that in a really helpful way. But what it used to trigger for me is I'm not doing enough. You're telling me I'm not good enough. And so my response to that would be either to placate or justify. So to tell them, well, I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. Or it would be to be defensive. Well, you haven't done the thing that you said you were going to do. Or it could, basically what was happening is somewhere in here, there was a wound that had been opened. And the way that I responded to that wound could be one of a number of ways. But what's happened is I'm not in the present moment able to hear what someone's saying because I've interpreted it and linked it back to something from my past. That's technically what a trigger is. And most of us are actually triggered huge amounts every single day. Our kids trigger us, our parents trigger us, work triggers us, people cancelling, that triggers, everything can trigger us. It's how we deal with it. So I believe that generations ago, it was all terribly stiff up a lip, keep calm and carry on, and that's fine, that's absolutely fine with this veneer. Whereas I kind of believe that in the last few years, we have cracked open this ability to be more authentic and more vulnerable. And so it's like, I can feel that I'm feeling this. I just don't know what to do with it. So I'm either going to go into attack of the person or the situation, or I'm going to go into self-attack because I'm clearly an idiot and I'm stupid. And we've suddenly created a massive story about just something that somebody said, or something we heard, or something that happened, or I was late and therefore I must be a complete idiot.
So a trigger is when we've had these life experiences of something in the past is dictating how we respond in the present moment. So that is a trigger, is something outside of us that has made us feel something emotional, and that emotion is being triggered. And the reason that we are talking about this now is that being triggered and triggers are a gift into doing self-work.
Yeah.
They are the flags to say, okay, it's time to look at the past and why you do the things that you do.
Absolutely.
And so we want to start cultivating this awareness of when you're in a dynamic with someone or something happens and you can feel that you are triggered, you can feel that emotional response in you, you can feel defensive, you can feel fearful, you can feel anxious, you can feel angry, you can, whatever that response is to that thing, is to clock it and to go, okay, I'm in this situation and I'm feeling something. And what we want to start cultivating is this coming away from the situation and reflecting on it. So what can really, really help, and this is the work of Byron Katie, this is the, is it true? This is the reflection of what are the facts here? Because the way that you've just described it, so if someone gives you a piece of advice and you go into the, well, they're telling me I'm stupid. And so that what you've heard is that they've just called me stupid. Is that true? Is that actually what happened? So we want to start coming away from situations, reflecting on situations and getting the facts down. What actually happened there? What was actually said? And then what was I telling myself? What was the story? What was the feelings that I was experiencing? What did it remind me of?
Sometimes I think we don't even know, right? Especially at the beginning. All I know is my mum triggers the hell out of me. And then I go, what's that about? Like, what is that about? You know, or my daughter's triggered the hell out of me, or my partner said something. I don't always know what it's about. Also, I kind of want to just say, that Laura mentioned it has to be an external stimulus. Well, you said external stimulus. I don't think it does have to be. I think it could be also something that's coming up about our past. I know that I've had situations, and I don't know about you, but I've had situations, particularly when I was younger, where I'd think about something and then be mortified about it. Like I would instantly in that moment be so flushed with embarrassment about something that I'd just remembered. I hadn't been stimulated to remember it, and then go, oh my God, how do I deal with that? So those triggers are, that they're such a blessing because they're offering you this opportunity to dive deeper. So even if we don't understand or can't work out why I'm feeling triggered, the only important thing to note is when that person spoke to me, I felt triggered. And the way I felt triggered was defensive, wanted to push them away, wanted to punish them, I wanted to make them hurt, or I wanted to run away, or I wanted to cry. So we really just need to start getting the distinction of, oh, I noticed that I was triggered because this is how I felt. I think I got to a point, I used to think I was incredibly robust. Then I realized that I just had a million layers of armor. And actually, the more I started to become aware, the more I realized that I was incredibly sensitive. And actually, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was an easily triggered person. Really easily triggered. And then as soon as I was able to admit, bloody hell, I'm really easily triggered. Like, what is this about? It was actually like, wow, I am an incredibly sensitive human. I'm a highly sensitive empath. I'm very sensitive, which is such a gift in my work, but it wasn't a gift in the family I grew up with. It was certainly not respected or honored. So I had to shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. So the more I was able to work through the layers of being told it wasn't okay, but believing for myself that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't okay, that I was fat and ugly, whatever it was, the stories that I was telling myself that day, because there were many of them. But the more I was able to be with those and go, I'm going to do the self-work on that. I'm not going to believe that anymore. I want to believe something different. I want to love myself. I want to go on this journey. Then I stopped being so triggered. And now I go, I'm really triggered. How fascinating.
It's always a flag, isn't it? When we feel that, wow, why did that upset me? What is that about? And being able to step back and have that self-reflection is just so important, because I know from my experience is that when an experience happens that triggers me, I go and dive into it and I'm like, oh my goodness, look at all this stuff. And that's what we really want to encourage here. Is we wanted to name what a trigger is, because we're going to be talking about them, and we want you to start noticing them in your life, because they are going to be the crumbs that lead you down the pathway of self-work.
Absolutely. That's so lovely. So I think, yeah, even using that language, I notice I'm triggered. I notice I'm feeling triggered. And you don't even have to know what about. Just, I notice I'm feeling triggered. That's, really helpful. Just becoming aware that you're being triggered. Because my experience used to be someone would say something to me and, oh my Lord, my defense was quick. Like I had this, I didn't even have to think about it. It was like, bam, there's the deflection. Bam, there's the attack. Bam, there's my self-defense. It was like, so it was almost like I had to carve out just a microsecond before that reaction to go, oh, I'm triggered. And to begin with, I would still be in because I could feel it. It was just such a well-honed talent and skill to be able to deflect it, to actually be able to sit there and go, ooh, ow, ooh. Yeah, that's ouchy.
Yeah, how can we stop reacting in that unconscious way? Because for me, it was the opposite. When I was triggered, I had the run away and the scared rabbit, and the I can't deal with this conflict, and how do I get out of this situation, and the collapse and getting smaller, rather than the defense that you had. I was much more like, I can't look after myself here. So much more anxious, more fearful. And I had to learn the same thing, is in that moment when I feel the tightening or the anxiety or the fear, it's that moment before of, oh wow, okay, here's a trigger.
Yeah.
Okay, this is an opportunity to work with it, to figure out what's going on, to be, and that is, from doing this, that's where I found the strength to be able to go into situations that triggered me and have a different response.
Yes. So actually what we're saying is, by identifying to ourselves that something has triggered us, we are able to stay present in the moment, which means that we can be objective, we can be curious, we can be vulnerable, and we can give ourselves open, and we can give ourselves time to explore it. So if you have got PTSD, if you have, I would still most definitely be recommending right now that you are pursuing working with trauma counselors, that you are doing it's trauma counseling, EMDR, any of the specialized trauma work about the trauma or traumas that you have experienced. They were, incredibly important for me. And they too will be leading you to this place of not going into free fall, shutdown, panic, whatever the reaction is, but being able to sit and be with it, to be able to change how you respond and move forward in a different way. So we are not saying that this is trauma work. I really recommend working with someone specifically for trauma work. And I would also recommend that you find someone that is specialized in the trauma that you have experienced. If it's sexual trauma, then a sexual trauma counselor, or whatever it is. That's really helpful. But this work is also going to be sitting next to it, and ultimately they're leading you to the same place. So that's just the identification of the difference between a psychological trauma trigger, but this understanding that actually on some level, and I don't, trauma is one of those words that's become really misused, like a migraine. People have a bad headache and they think it's a migraine. I'm like, no, unless you're vomiting and you have to be in a completely cold, dark room, it's a headache. Like, it's not a full migraine. Like, trauma is huge and life affecting. We're talking about the fact that actually all of us have had negative, conditioned, and even, I don't want to use the word traumatic, but they are a level of trauma, but they haven't put us necessarily into a proper trauma response, which actually changes how the brain works. Although they have changed how the brain works because they've conditioned us into being triggered. It's a very tricky thing to try and identify the difference between. But basically, if you have anything that you suspect could be PTSD or post-traumatic stress, which is a different level of it, then I would be recommending you also work with a professional. But this is, like, I don't work with a professional all the time. I did that work. This is how I deal with the everyday following my PTSD.
And the way that we react, like you said, you used to be incredibly defensive when you were triggered, and I would be frightened. These are survival strategies which we are going to talk about in the next video.